Welcome to Google Classroom 1.0. My name is Andrew, and I'm going to be taking you through Google Classroom today. Now, here's the questions that I want you to kind of have sitting in the back of your mind as you navigate this time that we're going to spend today. The first question is, what value will your Google Classroom add to your class? Like, you need to think about what you're hoping this tool is going to do for you. Now, some of you haven't chosen Google Classroom. Some of you has had Google Classroom chosen for you. And that is the reality that we're in, and that's okay. There's a lot of good reasons for that to happen, but at the same time, we may as well make the best of it. So if Google Classroom is a tool that you're going to put in place, what is it you're going to hope it does for your classroom? The second question is, how are the students going to get to your Google Classroom? The third question is, when they get there for the first time, what is it you're going to have them do? So generally speaking, you're going to want something waiting for them when they get there. And what is that thing going to be? The fourth question is, what other things will they normally have to do once they're there? And the fifth question is, how are you going to make sure they're doing all these things? So those are the questions I kind of want sitting in the back of your mind as you navigate this time, okay? So there's two different ways to access Google Classroom. The first way is up at that waffle, okay? And that's what we call this little array of 9 dots that sits right up in your Google Drive. When you're in Google Drive, everybody's got one of these, okay? When you click on it, one of these is the Google Classroom app, okay? So if you click on that, it'll take you to Google Classroom. Another way to get there is simply to type classroom.google.com, and that'll take you there too. For your students' purposes, a lot of your students are going to have the Google Classroom icon along the bottom of their school-issued Chromebook. That's something they can do so that your students don't have to type a URL. They can lift up their Chromebooks, and it's one of the icons along the bottom of the screen that they can just click on and take them to Google Classroom as well. Okay, so this is what Google Classroom is going to look like as the homepage. Now, yours won't look like this in all likelihood, okay? Yours is going to look like a lot simpler. You may have some things there if you have people that have been adding you to their classes. Maybe you're part of a 4th grade team, and so one of your more ambitious counterparts who's more comfortable with the tool set up a 4th grade Google Classroom page and then added you to it. And so you may have something that looks like this, where it says you're invited to teach this class. I'll show you how to invite teachers, but you would choose to accept or decline. If this is somebody you don't know, you may decide that I don't know who that is and I'm not going to join their Google Classroom page. But anyway, so now you're here. So let's talk about starting your first Google Classroom class. And then we'll talk about what it is and what's in there. Okay. Now, if it were me, it's not me, it's you. But if it were me, what I would do is I would start a Google Classroom just for the sake of having a play spot where you can click all the buttons and create a bunch of things and try all the stuff out and mess around with it, and then you're getting all your learning out of the way before you're confusing your students and the parents of those students and things like that. Okay, so the way that you would create one of these is you would go up here to this plus sign. Now, when I click on that plus sign, I see 2 options: join a class or create a class. Now, it is possible for you right now, if you've never created a Google Classroom page before, it is possible that yours will only say join a class. And the reason for that is your tech department may have a fail-safe bit built in to make sure that students don't actually form Google Classroom pages, because there's a lot of reasons we wouldn't want them to do that. And so it basically has a short little verification process that they would have to click a button and then you'd refresh and you would have this create class button. So if for whatever reason you're a teacher and you're logged in with your school account and you don't have this create class button, just reach out to your tech people. It's no problem at all. They'll just have to click you over, so it won't take long. Okay, so when you click that create class, you're going to be asked 4 questions. You only have to answer one of them. So all you're required to do is give it a class name. Put that in there and you'll click create. And it's going to auto-generate a Google Classroom class for you. Okay. So what you'd get is you would get this banner here. They'd auto select that banner kind of based on what their best guess is of what you put in there. Don't worry, you're not stuck with it. You can change that. You'll get a class code. We'll talk about what that is here in a second. You'll get an opportunity to generate a Google Meet link. We'll talk about what that is here in a second as well. And then I've got this down here because I was messing around with it. You won't have anything here at all. And then you've got these tabs along the top: Stream, Classwork, People, and Grades. We'll talk about each one of those. You've got your settings. You got your waffle. And then you got this stuff going on over here. Okay. So we'll talk about those. We'll talk about all those individual pieces. So you're in Google Classroom. Okay. Now, right now, all you have is a space that has potential and no one else has got access to it. Okay. You haven't shared it with anybody. You haven't done anything. It's just a space with potential and you can see what's going on there. Okay. So I want to start with the People tab. Okay. I want to start there first, and then we'll move to these other pieces because this is fairly simple and these are more nuanced. Okay. So that's how I'm going to handle that. So let's start with the People tab. So right now in your Google Classroom page, there's you, and that's it. You have no co-teachers. You've got no learners. You got nothing. Okay. Now, these little buttons up here are one of the ways that you can add people to your Google Classroom page. So if you are a classroom teacher, but you know that you're going to need other teachers to have access to your Google Classroom page as a teacher, so perhaps you've got a co-teacher that you're teaching with, or maybe you've got some special needs providers that are providing services to some of your students that would need access, or perhaps your principal has said that they want access to all the Google Classroom pages. This is how you would do that. Okay, so you would click the plus sign, and then you would start typing in the email or the name of the person that you want to add. I could click that, and then he would have access. I would invite him, and he would get a little notification that looks like this. So let's talk about adding students. So if you add, what you would do with students is that you would use this code down here. Okay. Now each class gets a code. That code is unique to that class, and it shows up in two different spots. It always will stay here under the students in the People tab. And on your front page, it also shows up here. And if you click that little box right there, it'll even blow it up so it's nice and big. Okay. Now, when the students go to classroom.google.com or click Google Classroom on their waffle, they won't see Create Class. They'll only see Join Class. And if they click Join Class, the very first box they get, and the only thing that they're asked to do is enter that code. So they would type that code in, or they would type, it's the same code, but you can find it in a couple different spots. Okay. Now, generally speaking, this is built out so that students would be sitting physically in your classroom and you would walk them through this process. So where life is going to get a little tricky is for the districts that are positively know that they're not going to see their students face to face before their students need to join the Google Classroom. So in that instance, you may need to send this code out to a parent via email or school messenger or mailing or whatever. So that'll be the trick there. But if you can get that code to the students or to the students' parents, then the student will be able to join Google Classroom. And I'm going to say this out loud so that you know, because it can be a little confusing. Your students' parents should not be in your Google Classroom. So you need to think to yourself, I'm adding students to my Google Classroom, not students' parents. This should not be used as a community engagement tool. This is only to communicate with your students. And the reasons for that are fairly simple. The first is that the students will have access to sharing out like school-related data so that they can answer questions on the front page, or they can be engaged in conversation and feedback and those kinds of things. That all becomes student record. That all becomes student data, at which point then if it became open to the community, you would be in violation of FERPA. So that's the first piece. The second piece is that we have to always be a little bit careful in terms of the digital spaces we're allowing minors and non-minors to interact with. So there's some privacy concerns there as well. So that's how you would add people, just to review. So you would add co-teachers here. You click the little plus sign and start typing their email address in or their username. And to add students, I would go ahead and send them that code right down here, or it lives right here. Okay, so over here, we've answered a little bit the first couple of questions here. What value will it add? And how will the students actually get there? Now, the question is, these next two questions, what is it you're going to have them do? Which is a great question. And if you haven't explored Google Classroom all that much, you may not even understand the potential for what you could have them do. So let's talk a little bit about that. Okay, so this is a different sort of dummy Google Classroom class that I use to model how to use this tool. And you'll notice that this one has significantly more going on. And the reason for that is I want to be able to show you what this looks like once it starts getting a little bit more robust and you've got more stuff kind of stuffed into it. So I'm going to click over on the Classwork tab, and I'm going to click back and forth between the Classwork tab and the Stream tab just to kind of show you the differences. So the Classwork tab in general is where all of the stuff that you create is going to live, okay? How that gets organized is entirely up to you, okay? You get to pick how that gets organized. You get to pick what these headings are up here. They're called topics. You get to choose what these are named. All of that is your choice, okay? And I would encourage you to choose as detailed a way as possible and to envision what this is going to look like to the students about week 4 or 5. Once a couple of students start falling behind, once a couple of kids are sick or have to miss a couple of days, once a couple of kids need to redo some things because they didn't do it very well, how are the students going to navigate that space once there's 30 assignments in there? Once you've been doing this for a month or a month and a half, how do you want that to be organized? Okay? All of those pre-thoughts kind of go into how you use the Classwork tab. Okay? The Stream tab has got a little bit less decision-making to it, because the Stream tab is always going to post naturally the most recent thing you posted on top. So you notice that this one goes down by date. So this one was June 2nd. This one was May 12th. This one was May 7th. This one was April 30th. This one's April 23rd. Okay, so the Stream tab is always going to show the students what they missed since they've last been there. It's the most recent stuff on top. So if you post 3 or 4 assignments, they're all going to live here, regardless of how you organize them here, okay? So there was a lot going on there, but this is one where I can show you how this stuff works, but how you choose to work it has to do with what value you wanted to add and how your students are going to interact with the page. Also, it has a little bit to do with how old your students are, because an older student is going to be able to at least theoretically handle a little bit more complex a setup. So if I click on this create button, this is how you'll start to make a new thing, okay, for the students to engage. So when I click on that create button, I see 5 possible options plus a 6th one down here, okay? If I want to create a new topic and that's all I want to do with this, then I can click on that. We'll talk about topics in a second. But let's suppose that we're going to talk about one of these things up here, okay? So assignment, quiz assignment, question, and material. So these are different. Assignment would be your standard, like, hey, here's some stuff. Here's something I want you to do with that stuff. And then turn it back in and I'll give you points or grade it or review it or whatever. A quiz assignment is going to be, unless the students are in your classroom and working on a school-issued Chromebook, a quiz assignment pretty much acts like a normal assignment. Okay, so for a remote setting, the distinction between quiz assignment and assignment isn't that big. There's ways that you can lock browsers and things like that if the students are all in class with you with Google Forms and on Chromebooks and stuff. So that's kind of what's going on there. But I've not noticed in a remote setting, I have not known those to be all that different. A question would be more like a discussion post, where you're just going to post a question directly into the assignment and the students don't have to do a lot of clicking. They just answer a question. So think maybe a survey or something like that you would want the students to respond to. And then material doesn't have any necessary interaction. It's maybe just a reading or a picture you want them to look at or a YouTube video you want them to watch. Okay, so that's what's going on there. Okay, so let's click on assignment and let's take a look at what's going on inside of this thing. Okay, so you've got two different things. You've got this left side, which is bigger, and this is where you'll really build the assignment out. And then you've got the clerical details of who this is for, how many points if you want to put points on it, when it's due, and what category it's under, what topic it's under. Okay, all right. So let's suppose that you are going to include, let's suppose you have the students doing the first math assignment, okay, which I know is really interesting because this is actually a social studies Google Classroom page, but I'm a math teacher, so we'll go with it. All right, so let's suppose that this is going to be a required assignment. You want all the kids to do it, and you want them to do it first. Like this is the first thing they do for math. Okay, so I would, if it were me, I would call this something like task number 1 or required task number 1. Okay? I am a big fan of overdoing it with detail in assignments. Have a standard naming convention. Required task number 1, math. Go math. Chapter 1. Lesson 1, exploration, something like that. And then if it were me, I would go down here and I would be super detailed. Number 1, read all directions first. Number 2, look below and find handout number 1 and the video named whatever. Number 3, open up the handout and read it all. Notice the 2 questions. I mean, you see what I'm doing here, right? You don't even write all this down. But like this, I mean, I would go so overboard with details because I will tell you that there are standard interactions that youngsters and teachers just get into the habit. You've got shorthand, you've got nods and looks that you give them. You know, you just say, come on, guys, you know how to do this. And they do. They normally do because we're good at that. We build relationships. We have little quirks that are about our classrooms, and the kids get it. The problem is you're going to miss all that relationship building at the beginning, and the problem is these are going to often be supported by parents. And so the parents not having any of that background, and the students, most of them having not met you much before, are going to need an overabundance of instructions at first to make sure, and this is the thought process I have, that there's literally one way to interpret that assignment being done, and that it's the way you want it done. If you leave it up to the students to interpret how you want it done, then they're going to choose all kinds of things. And then you may not get what you're after. And then you've lost an assignment because it's not giving you what you need. Okay? Which is an opportunity for the students to explore something, or an opportunity for you to see how much the students have learned, or an opportunity to see what skill set they have in terms of certain tech pieces, or how engaged they can be from a remote setting. Like there's all kinds of reasons you need that assignment to go exactly the way you drew it up. And if you get lax or vague in your instructions, then it might end up going a different way, which means it's not serving the purpose. It's not adding the value that it was designed to add. Okay? All right. Once you've named it and once you've written your super detailed instructions, down here is where you can actually add those resources. So you'd click add down here, and you could add one of these 4 things. Okay? So this would be a file out of your Google Drive. If you've already got handouts in there, you'd click on it, and it just brings up your Google Drive, and you would go through and you would choose, oh yes, I need to add this PowerPoint presentation, or oh yes, I need to add this Google Draw, or whatever. Okay? You just choose those out of there, and it will add it right on there. You could add a link. So maybe you got the students going out to, Think Central, or out to some article on Discovery Ed, or something that you want them to look at or read or watch. Okay. A file is a file off of your computer. So if you've got a Microsoft Word document or a picture that you took on your phone this weekend, maybe you saw a really cool butterfly and you wanted to show the picture of the butterfly or something like that, that's where you could add that file. And then the last one is a YouTube video, which with YouTube, you can add YouTube. You can search right in here for a video. Quick disclaimer, please, 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 please do not add any YouTube video for your students to watch that you have not thoroughly reviewed from beginning to end yourself. Being able to search YouTube in here can give you a false sense of security. This is not searching like school safe YouTube. This is searching YouTube, just YouTube. So make sure that if you're going to use this, that you watch the videos all the way through. Once you've decided what you're going to add, so let's suppose I'm going to add a slideshow presentation, and it'll sit right down there like that. Now, you get this menu comes up, okay? So with this menu, you have decisions to make. The decisions you have to make are, how do you want the students to engage that document? If you choose students can view the file, that means students will only be able to open it up and look at it. It's a view-only access, okay? If you choose students can edit the file, that means that they can change that literal file, okay? Meaning that if Dave goes in there and opens it up and changes it, adds all of his answers, adds a slide, and then afterwards, Jamie goes in and opens it up, Jamie is going to see the file after Dave changed it all. So it's going to be the file with all of Dave's answers on it, okay? Now, this might make sense if it's a collaborative document or if it's like a sign-up sheet, all right? Because you would want to see what Dave's bringing to the party, because that if you don't do that, then everybody brings napkins and no one brings the guacamole, right? So you want to be able to, you may have an instance where you want them to see each other's answers, and that would be fine. But most of the time, what you're going to choose is make a copy for each student. And this is the classic, like, I go down to the copy machine, I run off all the copies, I come back and everybody gets their own, and then they answer all the questions on their own, and then they pass them all back to me. Okay, so that's usually what you're doing when you're passing out handouts, when you've got documents you need them to engage with and answer questions on, or add pictures to, or draw on, or whatever. Okay, so make a copy for each student is probably what you're going to default to. Okay, now what's going to happen when you do that is when a student goes in there and opens the document, it's going to make a fresh copy in that student's Google Drive. It's going to change the answer, or change the name of the document. It's going to say an introduction to Google Classroom hyphen, and then the student's name. That's going to be the document in that student's Google Drive. And then it's also going to share that document with you as the teacher, which is really nice because they don't have to then manage the sharing access. They don't have to remember to add their name to it. Wouldn't it be really nice if when you passed out the papers, it automatically put the kid's name on it? That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Come on now. So that's actually a really useful tool. And then what happens is in your Google Drive, and I'll show you what this looks like in a minute, you get a folder in your Google Drive that has its name is this title, and then it'll have all the handouts filed into that file with all the student names on it. So you'll get however many, right? Maybe if you teach Algebra 1 and all you teach is Algebra 1, maybe it'll be 100. Or maybe if it's you teach a 3rd grade classroom, maybe it's 28 or whatever. Okay. All right. So now you've got your super detailed title. with your standard naming convention. You've got your super detailed instructions, so there's only one way for the students to interpret how they need to go through the activity. Now, let's head over here. This is where life gets super interesting. So this one says, which classrooms do I want this activity to go to? You could choose all of them, or you could just choose one of them, or you could choose two of them, okay? So the cool thing here is for you teachers that like the theater teacher that asked the question, like I'm going to have to sign up the entire school into my Google Classroom page. Well, it's possible that you might need to break that into multiple sections. So maybe it's for theater freshmen, theater sophomores, theater juniors, theater seniors, just so that like logistically you can get all the students enrolled. But then every assignment that you create, if it's for all of them anyway, you can just add it here. And you would say, I want that to go to the freshmen and the sophomores and the juniors and the seniors. And then when you clicked assign, it would push into all of those Google Classroom pages. So you wouldn't be like quadrupling your work. You'd be adding a few extra clicks, but it wouldn't be like, I've got to create that assignment, and then I've got to do the whole thing again in this other class, and I got to do the whole thing. You don't have to do all that, okay? Now, in any given class, though, you could also only choose certain students to see it. So if you've got a special needs service provider who needs to have their students see a certain assignment, but only 2 or 3 of them really need to see it. Maybe it's a survey to go home with a parent or whatever, right? And ordinarily they would just pull those kids aside at the end of the day and stuff it in their backpack and say, "Hey, make sure mom and dad sees this." Well, we can't do that now because we're not getting access to the kid's backpack, right? So over here, you would say, okay, this is going to go in my social studies class, but, and when you click down here, you would see all your students listed all the way down. You would just click on the students who need to see that thing. And then they would be the only ones who see it. And everybody else you didn't check wouldn't be any the wiser. It wouldn't have some grayed out assignment or anything like that. It just wouldn't show them anything. They wouldn't know anything had happened. Okay. Now, so this is if you want multiple classes. This is if you want individual students. Now, the disclaimer for this is you can't choose both. If you choose multiple classes, it goes to everybody in those classes. And if you want to do individual students, then you have to do it one class at a time. Okay, so there you can't have it both ways there. Okay, all right. So for points, you can either free type in here or you can choose ungraded. With due dates are nice because they will then engage the students as these things come up. So if you have maybe a week's worth of assignments and you want the students to finish them up by Sunday at 5 p.m. or something like that, you can set all those assignments with a Sunday at 5 p.m. due date. And as the students log in, there'll be a little line across the side that says, hey, you've got due dates coming up. These assignments are going to be due soon. Make sure you do them. Or this one's overdue, you didn't get to that one, or whatever, okay? And this is the topics. Now, there's a lot of different ways that you can do topics. If you do it by subject, so maybe you teach elementary and you've got multiple subjects that you're teaching, or maybe you go by week. So maybe with elementary, maybe it's math, maybe it's reading, maybe it's writing, maybe it's science, right? And so you have those different categories. Or for a secondary teacher, maybe it's week 1, September 1st to September 7th, week 2, September 8th to September 14th, and then however you choose to do that. I also had a teacher that was getting the feel for how much work their students could actually complete in a week. So she had week 1 date and then required, and then another category would be week 1 optional. So it's sort of like if you have time. So she would have over here in the classwork section, she would have all of those things there, but the required ones would be in the required topic, and the other ones, the optional ones, would be in the optional topic. And you've got to think that way, right? If you post 10 assignments and all you really need the students to do is get through maybe the first 4 of them, but the rest of them are there if they need things or if they need extra help or practice or whatever, you're going to have some type A kids and type A parents who are going to feel like if they don't complete every single thing there, they'll be falling behind. And you'll be adding stress. If you don't find a way to declare that, like, hey, these last couple are like extra. If the kids enjoy it or they need extra help or they need more things to do. Okay, so find a way to distinguish between those things and be very clear about that. So let's suppose I'm going to choose week 1, and then I'm going to hit assign. So required task number 1, Go Math, chapter 1, lesson 1, exploration. That was the name of the assignment. Okay. So now it's going to go ahead and assign it. We're going to go down here to week 1, and there it is. Required task number 1, posted at 10:51 a.m. Look at that. Over here in the stream, now I've got a new assignment that's here. And if I go to my Google Drive, it has automatically created in my Google Classroom folder in my, which class was that? Social Studies. And then here's all the different assignments. There's the new one. It already created the folder. Required math task number 1. Go Math chapter 1, lesson 1, exploration. So it's already created all those sort of like back-end administrative logistics pieces that are going to be waiting for you. Now, with these, you have the ability to drag these around. So if you don't like the way this looks, and I can understand why you wouldn't like the way it looks because it's a jumbled up mess right now, you can always drag these whole topics and it'll bring all the assignments with them. And right now, you are changing the way that your students see the class too. Let's go back to the stream. And do you see this Meet link here? So one of the things Google did is it added a Google Meet link that is only accessible in your Google Classroom. So it gives you a unique Google Classroom Meet link that only is effective when a teacher opens it up. It doesn't have to be you, by the way. It could be any teacher in your system could open that up. The way that you generate that, because if you recall, when we were in the new Google Classroom page that I made, which was called Social Studies Grade 8, you notice that I hadn't generated it. With your new class, this is what this is going to look like. Okay, so if you click on that link, it'll say add Meet to your class. With Meet Video, you can connect students for distance learning, generate Meet link. Boom. Now we've got it. And you can choose whether you make it visible to the students or not. So right now, if a student came in with that little toggle switch turned on, they would see my Google Meet link. If I turn that off, they wouldn't be able to see it. Okay. I'll always be able to see it, but they wouldn't be able to see it. Okay. Not visible to students. Okay. Another way you can get at that is by going up to the settings, which is this little gear up here. And this is where you can control the Google Meet. If, for whatever reason, your code gets corrupted to the point where maybe it gets out and students who you don't want to come into your Google Meet are coming into your Google Meet because your students have been rascals and shared it out with their friends, you can always reset this by just clicking this down arrow next to the Google Meet link and resetting it. And now it's a brand new link and that previous link is dead. They won't be able to access it. This is where you can choose what your students can and cannot do, okay? So if you don't want your students to be able to post things or comment on things, so for example, my daughter has rats. Like she's got pet rats. They're kind of like, I don't know, they became kind of like folk heroes over the quarantine in her 5th grade classroom. So she would periodically post pictures of her rats or videos of her rats onto the Google Classroom page. And she was able to do that because her teacher had this setting set so that the students can post things to the front page of Google Classroom. If you don't want them to be able to do that, then you can choose that they can only comment on the things that are posted, or that they can't do either of those things and that only teachers can post or comment things, okay? So those are options that you have. You also have the options for what happens on the stream. So you can show attachments and details and everything. So every assignment would show up with all the directions and the attachments and everything. Or you can show a condensed notification, which is what I had, which just says, you know, Andrew posted a thing. And then they'd have to click over to the classroom tab to find it. Or you could have it show nothing. And that would be up to you as well. So you can fiddle around with these and decide which way you like best. So if you choose those, then you click save. And when you go back to the stream, you notice that this whole thing just got a whole lot longer. That rather than it saying Andrew posted a new assignment, and that's all it said, it says Andrew posted a new assignment. It shows you all the directions. It shows you all the attachments. So it just depends on how much detail you want out there on the stream. It doesn't change anything in the Classwork tab. That's just all about the stream. Okay, last thing I want to cover is I want to go back to Classroom and talk to my admins and my special ed teachers in the room, my service providers who are going to be in multiple Google Classroom pages, because you're going to get flooded with emails if you don't handle these settings. Okay, and I don't want you to do that because that's no fun at all. Okay, so over here in your main Google Classroom page where you'll see all the different classes, and before you've clicked into any of those classes, click here, okay, and scroll all the way to the bottom to see settings. When you click on that, most of what's there is email notifications. So you can choose what types of notifications you receive. So you might just, like if you're a principal of a building and you just want to have access to these things so you can click in and out of them, you might just click on that right there and just be done with it. Like, I don't want any email notifications. Don't email me things. If the teacher's got an issue, if a parent's got an issue, they can email me directly, but I don't need to get emails through Google Classroom. You may also choose, though, to keep some of these on. So maybe you want to see how often your teachers are actually posting work. So then maybe you leave these ones on because you just want to stay up to date on what people are posting and you don't mind those emails because maybe it's not that many. Okay.